something pretty swell indeed, and I hope the rest of the community sees that as fact. Over at the museum, Paul was kind enough to give me this walk around, and um, gosh, there were lots of things where Paul and I were talking, and I kind of wanted to get a general view, but at the same time, I wanted to get completely derailed and spend a lot of time looking at a specific object. And how those objects are presented, ultimately, for me, it doesn't take much to get me started. But for some people, they're a harder sell about what the connection is between an object and its associated importance or its association in the narrative. And so, as you go back over there, continually try and look at it as a stranger and think about what is it really important that we're saying? What do we want to say? The museum itself is, I think, not a place where it's a collection of things, where the number of things is the important object, or anything of the value of things is not the important object for the whole place, but it's what this community is and how you say that. And so, and if there's anything to look out for in terms of what you're doing, there were a couple of places where I saw several things that are essentially the same. I'll say typewriter, and you guys are not bad. I mean, we have easily 30 typewriters in the museum collection, and essentially that's about 14 to me. So, and I know a couple of museums where that is just, it's grown like the measles, and they've got 50 typewriters, and the museum is little bitty, and they can't stop. At that point, everybody knows you because, you're the guys that have all the typewriters.
Here's another one.
And so they start leaving it on your doorstep late at night and stuff like that. And you don't want to be that. You don't want to be the typewriter folks, because the story you're telling originates elsewhere, and it's more important than my mom used that typewriter. My brother's very possessive of my dad's old typewriter, but frankly, it's just a typewriter, and he didn't use it all that much. So, the narrative that my brother can associate with that Underwood noiseless, it has limits. And so, as you develop the topics of what you want to say about Piedmont, how do we get here? Why are we here? What's the association of Piedmont as a town with Piedmont as natural resources? What's the thing that kept Piedmont going? Well, it was transportation. It was rail. That's what gave Piedmont the boost for its next step after origination. And so you have to ask yourself those kind of questions about who are we, why are we, what are we doing here, what do we do in the past, and the direction that the town's going. Piedmont's in a beautiful place right now. I can't say that Oklahoma City growing this direction, I can't say that's entirely a positive thing, but what's happening with Piedmont as a resource and as a community, I think is really wonderful, because it can continue in a way that's really, really healthy. I lived in a town in northeastern Oklahoma that's taken exactly the opposite route. you know, in the mid-60s, it was about the same size as Piedmont is now, and it's now less than 3,000 people. And gosh, it's just the saddest thing to go to. It's just heartbreaking, you know, because partially because I'm kind of Pollyanna, you know, I feel like I grew up in a town where everybody was okay. I know that's not the truth, but anyway, that was my perception, that everybody was okay. If I got hurt on my bicycle, I could go to anybody's door and say, can you call my dad? You know, and, or, you know, do you know mom, she works at the bank? Those kind of questions. And now it's not that way. The structure of the town has not maintained itself as the town has contracted, and it's a very tough situation to be in. And here the opposite thing is going. You know, Piedmont is maintaining its core identity at the same time that it's developing new resources and can take advantage of those resources. Ideally, you know, what you're going to see is this building on what Piedmont is, and it's so Piedmont's going to ultimately be more of Piedmont, you know, which I don't know how to say that precisely for you, but that's how I picture this town at this point in time. It's a lovely place to be as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
But then again, you know, the Piedmont Historical Society's place in all of that, I think, is really significant, and it can continue to be core to the way this town looks in 20 years. And so I'm always glad for an excuse to come to town.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me out.
Did you notice our washing machine, our back porch washing machine, gas mower, then the hand rocked one?
Yes.
Most of the
absolutely.
people that come to the museum get a kick out of that because they think we wouldn't want to be doing that.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
have a stepson who, I was telling Paul earlier, I have a weakness for sports cars, and so this year I bought an old British sports car, and so Ian and I were driving along one day, and he was kind of making fun of the air vents in the thing. He's going, boy, not much cold air is going to come out of there. I'm going, what do you mean cold air? I said, it's July, man, there's no cold air coming out of there. And he said, well, I thought it was kind of windy. I said, Ian, do you think that's an air conditioner? And he said, well, yeah. I said, no, this car has no air conditioner. I could have hit him with a wagon spoke, and it wouldn't have got him by surprise any more than that. He was dumbfounded, and I suddenly realized this boy has never
Been in a car without air conditioner.
It was inconceivable to him. Well, you know, which also led me to feel guilty. It's like, my God, I can't believe I let him get to this age and be that ignorant. But, yeah, that's just oddly cruel. But you know, same way with the washing machine.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Gosh, if they can get any appreciation out of where they are now,
Yeah.
that's a magnificent thing.
The other thing was no power steering either.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
roll up windows.
Steers easier if you go faster.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Our concern here is, as you can see, we're all getting the gray hair and getting up in the years.
Mhm.
And
Gosh, I don't know what you're talking about.
how do we attract younger people to keep preserving?
I'll tell you what our experience is in Oklahoma City is, you know, we do 80,000 school kids a year. And so we get.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
We get.
Can we turn the air
80,000
conditioner
school
off?
children a year, and so
off,
Some of those
yeah.
are there with organized groups, some are there with families, but, in terms of the kids that are interested about it and carry it beyond that obligatory visit, there
Yeah,
is
get that off.
a few things that take place. One is you guys are doing the absolute right thing in terms of sneakily adapting to modern communication techniques. Social media is like one of the best investments of time you can do. And because number one is it's cheap. And two, that's what those people read. You know, they don't communicate, you know, the print version of your newsletter is not gonna have the impact that the version on the screen is gonna have. So you guys are already doing the right thing in that regard, but in terms of core involvement, you know, occasionally you'll find the stray kid who you know, that appeals to them. But I'd say mostly it's a matter of maturation, you know, and if you develop a story that captures people's attention, you know, a good story is a good story. And you've got a building full of potentially good stories. And so the way you do the narration is vitally important to catching the eye and the spirit of the young person. Did you have a question, Paul?
No, I was gonna follow it right with that.
You know, I worry about the same question a lot, and I don't really, you know, I'm kind of stumbling here because I don't have a great answer. You know, you can get some kids because they're interested. Some of them come to it later on. And so if you can, I think, for sake of self-preservation, one of the things that might be useful is focusing on young adults who are community oriented. Doesn't matter if they're history oriented, but if they are community oriented,
Mm-hmm.
you potentially have the hook that you can get them in with. And
Are there that many young people that are community oriented? Do you see that much?
I say so more all the time, you know, and of course I say that from the standpoint of some participation that we have, and then overall things like the fact that Oklahoma City's got the youngest mayor it's ever had, you know, but.
So does Piedmont.
Yeah. So, those factors make those people, you know, pay attention to that and bring in their friends.
Yeah.
And because you've got all the wonderful hooks in the world, and if you can make them feel part of that and make it to where it's their job to help with those narratives, and then it's a matter of, okay, what do you really like? What about this story of Piedmont do you really like? Is it your own property? Is it how the town developed? Is it this, or is it technology? You know, one of the things I've repeatedly gone haywire personally with over the years is the origins of technology. You know, I've taken art class, and the next thing I know, I'm interested in where paper comes from, and you know, so I end up taking classes in paper making and start growing weird plants out in the yard that I make paper out of. Or when I went to Pawnee Bills, one day I went into the blacksmith shop. I had a farrier hired, and he would do horseshoes and put on demonstration for the public, and then he'd do some other kind of stuff there. I went in one day, I needed a piece for a wagon. You know, you can't go to the True Value and get a piece for a a wagon anymore. So I went in and said, you know, I've gotta make one of these. How do we do this? And he said, well, we can do this, but that's big, it'll go faster if there's two of us. And I said, well, I got nothing else going on. So 3 hours later, I was just as fired up as I could get. It's like, man, I gotta do this. And so periodically I've been blacksmithing ever since then, you know, and it's the same way with you know, making things out of clay and you name it. The worst part of that was though, years ago, I worked at a state park and there was prehistoric pottery in the area. And so I had a kids program, and so over the course of a few months, we went out and we dug clay out of the creek bed. We mixed the clay up with shell tempering like was done in the same area about 1,500 years previously. And then we built a big fire and fired these pots so each of the kids could have some. And talk about primitive technology and earlier cultures in that part of Oklahoma. And I was using a fair amount of cow chips as fuel. And my wife swore that every time I started to do one of these programs, I would wait till the wind was out of the southeast before I would light it, because it would just go straight at our house. You know, so some projects I've done have turned out better than others. But it's a matter of the hook, and there's no blanket hook. It's all down to individuals.
Okay, Paul's ready.
And I'm sorry, I'll be quick on this, but 3 things came to my mind.
Oh, please.
But I'll be fast. One, when you talked about will the young people get involved, with what I did with the park, we got 2,000 people out there working together, and I keep hearing people say, I was part of this park because I worked over there and I helped build this thing. Even though I don't know anything about carpentry, I learned and I did that part. I think that's a big part of getting community in. So if we want young people, get them involved like that.
If you have, again, it's the hook. If you've got a specific project
That you can get them.
that you can pull people in with, and then there's the bleed over effect, and
Right.
potentially you end up with volunteers who become you ultimately.
My second comment, sorry, I'm doing so many. My second comment was when I was in seminary, I actually did a research project because it related to how do we get young people and families involved into their church. And my final, so I did all this research on it, and then I did the presentation. What I discovered was that actually the seniors were the critical thing. I took an example of an old church, very small, in a farm community, which is where my wife grew up. And they had a project that they did. And in this project, they were building this extra wing onto their church because they wanted to bring families and kids into their church. And that's why they wanted to do all this. Well, some of these young people had the idea, but they really weren't jumping in to do it. And when you asked the seniors, they were like, well, okay, you know, maybe, whatever. But what happened is because I call them the wise seers, because they knew a lot, they knew how to do things, a lot of them were farmers, they could build stuff, because they had more time, because they had more money than some of the young people that are struggling to make it. Because of that, they actually, even though they didn't start it, they took on the leadership and the thing grew. And because of the seniors in the church, they now have a lot of families. So it's kind of like if you're going after them because they're young people with kids, it might backfire. But if you go at it that we're going to build this thing and the seniors are going to take it under their wing, like a lot of seniors think, well, I'm done, you know, I'm not much good. Oh no, you're hugely beneficial to the community. And I think if all the seniors said, yeah, we do matter, then that would make it grow just on its own. So that's kind of what the thesis was of when I did that. The third thing I wanted to ask you, and is a very pointed question. As you've said, you like the museum a lot. And when I was walking with you and you came in here,
Yeah.
you were very, very pleased. Okay, now tell us what we need to do to be better. No one's going to hold you
No,
negatively. We want to know, what can we be doing
I'm
better?
pretty thick-skinned at this point.
Yeah.
If I was pick your topics, what are you going to talk about? You know, if I have to hunt to find out the reasons why Piedmont exists, my experience is going to be diluted just a little bit. You know, because I had to work for it, God forbid. But anyway, that's, you know, for me, that's what history is all about. That's the same thing it's about for Dr. LaCroix, who I just provided the material on the Boone Notes for. My final email back and forth with her, and you know, I got interested. Okay, who is asking this stuff? And I looked it up, and this woman had the scariest resume I have ever seen in my entire life. She graduated Harvard summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, law school at Yale, you know, and her list of publications that she had done was an entire page long, and now is a chaired professor at the University of Chicago. So, Lord, who am I dealing with? But, which did two things. One is I really want to read this book when it's finished. And the second is, you know, this realization that those things that drive me in the history business are not singular. You know, her final email to me included the commentary about, I love this. This is why I go to archives, is, you know, pulling this unknown into my work. And,
Yes.
And at whatever level that happens, it can happen in that building.
We need to have stories, right?
Yeah. We all live, you know, we live in a world of stories. And so you pick your topics, and it's okay if you don't tell everything. In fact, it's probably better. Number one, you don't have room for everything. And two, if you try and tell everything, you'll tell some stuff better than others. But if you pick your topics and tell them, well, with the artifacts you have or the artifacts that you can get, another long-term thing is, often we're very passive about objects, and it's not always necessary. You can sometimes get exactly the artifact you need to illustrate the story. And I'll give you the best example of my entire life, which just happened so well, I still can't believe it 2 years later. But once in a while, Dr. Blackburn turns me loose and says, what do you want to do? And so a couple of years ago, I said, I want to do an exhibit on the history of fast cars in Oklahoma. And because at that time, there was potentially a Grand Prix race going to be organized to actually happen in Oklahoma City. And I wanted our part to coincide with that. And about 3 weeks into it, the whole thing fell apart in terms of the Grand Prix. And the Grand Prix people said, no, we don't want to do that. And so I went to Dr. Blackburn, and I was kind of, you know, had my head down, and, well, Bob, that's not gonna work. And he said, well, do it anyway. And I said, well, why not? You know, and so ultimately I developed this narrative talking about fast cars in Oklahoma, and it has different elements about the narrative. Part of it, I wanted to deal with the fact that Okies are just rabid collectors. You know, everywhere you go, there's somebody collecting something. And the numbers of amazing car collections in Oklahoma just astounds me constantly. So, you know, that was part of the narrative itself. And it was also the core of the narrative in that I didn't own a darn one of those cars I put on exhibit. And I had cars from 1910 to 2006, and I used a total of 18 cars for the exhibit. And the value of those cars was over $8 million, and every one of them was loaned to me. I only had one guy who said his son would not loan me that particular car, but the dad loaned me a car worth, well, he paid $1 million for it, and had it delivered to the museum, and it was the wildest thing you ever saw. And I had a guy call me up one day, said, I hear you need a Jaguar for the exhibit. And I said, yes, I'm really hunting for an E-type convertible. And he said, well, I've got what you need. I said, well, I don't know you, and you don't know me. I said, let's go have lunch, because you know, we're talking about something kind of serious here. You know, his car was an award-winning, you know, preservation effort, and though ultimately he did loan it to us for the exhibit, and it turns out, you know, this was one of the really good parts of doing this exhibit, is ultimately I got to know a new person. And here's this Okie guy living in Oklahoma City, and he and his wife restored this Jaguar together over the course of 13 years, and both of them did it. And I said, how did that happen? And he said, well, Vicky realized at some point if we were going to have social interaction together, she had to get greasy. And he said, I was out working on the car one day, and this little head popped under there and said, what do you need next? And you know, they worked on it together for 13 years. That was a great thing. And in addition to that, you know, this car was astounding. I said, how could this be? Like, it didn't leak oil. I don't know how many of you have been around old British cars, but they're all terrible. And Jaguars are notorious about leaking oil. Enough so there's just lots of jokes about it. And so I said one day, Dick, your car doesn't leak oil. Well, it better not, you know, grumbly. So I finally said, you know, what did you do before you started playing with cars all the time? And he said, well, I was the lead launch engineer for the Apollo space program, and I was the hydrogen systems engineer for the space shuttle. Well, you really are qualified to work on that. So it's that kind of continuing process that keeps this whole business terribly exciting. I had a doctor's appointment recently, and my doctor's going, hey, you and I haven't really talked about retirement. I said, that's because I'm not retired. I got stuff to do. And he said, perfect. I said, that's exactly perfect. So, you know, my wife probably thinks otherwise if I was to look at her heart of hearts. But she's very kind. So, nonetheless, you know, this doing a topic, finding the narrative that you want to say in there and the objects you want to say it with are all part of building a good story. And then it's a matter of letting people come in and open their minds to the importance of what you're saying, and with any luck, open their hearts to what you're saying as well. So
we need to make changes, I know, in there. We need wanted
Oh,
to
sure.
rearrange to keep the interest of people that come in.
Yeah, if you
We
keep
haven't
it
done that.
if you keep it the same forever. Anybody ever go to the old Historical Society building, that grand old 1930 building we had? It's a wonderful building, you know, marble staircases and stuff, but God, was it boring. And we didn't change exhibits in there for ages, partially because we were crippled by the building itself. You know, we couldn't control the temperature, we couldn't control this and that, we had no budget. And so ultimately a series of lucky things happened and we were able to develop the new history center, and it was complete change. We suddenly had a breath of life where we could collect again, and we could collect things that weren't just routine, and we had space to tell our stories in a more effective way. And part of telling that story effectively is the fact that there are no permanent exhibits in the new building. I will say that with the caveat that despite any design schedule for new exhibits, that there's the rule of thumb that the heaviest thing will stay on exhibit the longest. And we have a windmill inside the building that I really wanna be gone before it comes out, cause it took 18 of us to move it. And then when we got it set up, I had to get up in the top of it and do some wiring to hold it in place. I don't know if I can do that now, so there's that factor to the exhibits as well.
When you were talking, one thing that came to my mind about a story, and I've heard parts of it, I don't know the whole thing, but it was, what was the people that were kidnapped and killed and the bank, or what was all that? Yeah, you know, I mean, it's kind of a gruesome thing, but that's what piques people's interest.
Yeah.
And we probably ought to get more of that down in writing and have an exhibit on it before people are gone that can't tell us the story. I mean, I can't tell them.
Yeah,